have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
So welcome to another episode of Jon's Entitled Podcast, a partner of MoshPitNation.com. This week's guest, it's a really fucking good one. It is Blothar the Berserker, a.k.a. Michael Bishop of Gwar. And with me, as always, is Daniel Terry. How are you doing?
I am doing great. How are you tonight, Jon?
I am fucking really excited to get this episode out. I was, really looking forward to doing it, and we'll kind of get into some of the headaches sort of trying to get this done initially. But I mean, like I said in the Necrogoblicon thing, I am really excited about this. It couldn't have gone better considering the kind of conversation we ended up having.
Yeah, it was really cool. I also got to check out some other bands while I was listening to it, and I loved it, man. And we'll get into it whenever we get back from the interview. But I was not expecting such an insightful interview. Well,
thank you.
very down to earth. I was talking about him.
Wow. Okay. I guess that wasn't a very down to earth thing of me to do.
No, it's fine. But yeah. So you're a little upset about something tonight.
Yeah. So very interestingly enough, as we were waiting for us to find time to do this intro and outro stuff for this episode specifically, news broke today of famed director of Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn, being fired from Guardians of the Galaxy. The reason he got fired was really fucking stupid, but it's so on brand for part of this conversation that I did with Blothar the Berserker that it was just too hard not to touch in this intro. So basically, James Gunn got fired for some tweets that he made 10 years ago and a little bit closer in time, over from 2009 to 2012, I think was one of the dates I saw on the tweets.
Man, 10 years ago, that's crazy.
And the fucked up part is before the first Guardians movie even came out, he apologized for those tweets back then. So he already pre-apologized for all these things, and everything was kind of seemingly forgotten or forgiven, whichever adjective you want to use, I guess. But here we are, all these years later, and people are finding these tweets and getting all upset and being like, "Oh, this offends me. He should be fired." And it's like, but he already apologized for it. And how many times? Shit, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. There might be pieces of me.
Neither.
There might be pieces of that person who are still around, but a lot of things that have happened in that 10-year time frame have shaped who I am now. And would I definitely say some of my proudest moments were when I was 24? No. But I think the thing in the day and age we live in now, where everything's on the internet, again, I think something that has been said several times over this podcast with a lot of the people I've had on, that it's there's various photos of these people and all this kind of stuff, and we live in this weird time capsule where you put something out and potentially 10, 15, 20 years later, shit gets used against you, and it's but I guess you shouldn't say something if you don't want people to bring it back up. I mean, it's I remember there was a tweet, I forget who it was some kid who was a 5-star recruit for, I want to say, college basketball. Or no, I'm sorry, I think he went into the NBA. I think that's what it was. And there were tweets of him from when he was in high school or middle school, and he's using the N-word, and he's reposting lyrics to rap songs and stuff.
Oh no.
And everyone's like, "Oh, is he a racist?" And it's come on, man. Dude was was not even how are we judging someone who's basically almost now coming into adulthood when they were 12, 13, shit they were saying when they were 12 or 13. Like, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah, I mean, like, going back to what you said about 10 years ago. I mean, I've talked about this a lot on my podcast. Dude, 10 years ago I was like a fundamentalist conservative. Like only 10 years ago. Like there's stuff, you know, maybe it's not public. I don't know if you could even find it if you looked for it now, but you know, I would happily sit down and have a conversation with somebody about why their religion was wrong, or why, you know, like why their lifestyle was destructive, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like just stuff that I don't necessarily agree with now. So it's like the kind of person you are when you're essentially a kid. You know, I mean, me 10 years ago, I was in my very early 20s. You know, so like people do change over time. And I think the interesting thing about this case too is the fact that he apologized prior to us living in the Twitter age, so to speak. You know, I mean, we had Twitter back then, but like we didn't have a Twitter president then. You know, we didn't have all of this stuff that is, you know, like back then the social media, your comments on social media were kind of largely, like, you might have pissed some people off, but it wasn't like it wasn't the career ending thing that it is now.
Yeah.
And you know, this is where the scary part about it being online forever comes from. But I mean, it's hard to believe that it's not a vendetta from somebody somewhere, because like, dude, you know how hard it is for me to pull up a tweet I liked that somebody said 3 days ago?
Yeah.
You got to do some deep digging if you're going all the way back to 2009. I mean, I'd almost imagine you're on like Wayback Machine and you're like typing in people's Twitter handles and finding these things. Like somebody went out to find that information specifically just to smear someone. Now, like, I'm not defending what he said, but he apologized. He's not defending what he said.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, to me, it's very strange to me that you could be fired from a job. Like if I got a job, you know, I just got a new job, you know, and if the dude's like, hey, you know, about 10 years ago, you said to somebody that you thought that they were going to hell. We don't want that kind of thing in our company, so you're fired.
Right.
You know, totally justified if I said it to somebody yesterday.
Right.
You know, like it's obvious that that's, you know the way that I am now, but yeah, that's pretty ridiculous, and it'll be interesting to see what that does to that franchise of movies, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I very much just, like I said, in light of this conversation and where I end up kind of some of the things I talk about with politically correctness, this whole thing with, you know, Steel Panther, which, you know, kind of the episode starts off with. It's just crazy to see that like, you know, and Doc Coyle and I talked about this toward the end of the chat I did with him a while ago, where it's like, I feel like this is the byproduct of living in a world where you can tailor make whatever experiences you specifically want, but then as a result of those, that's what you expect everyone else to uphold across the board. So it's like, there's my set of rules and how I think everything should be, but then because of that, now I think everyone else should be the same way. And it's like, you can't, I take it back. I guess you can, because that's what we're showing, but it's like, whatever happened to being like, I don't fucking like this. I don't care. I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm not going to give it any credence. You know, it's like that, you know, from The Simpsons, just don't look. Goes away. It goes away if you don't look at it.
Right.
And, you know, I understand that's kind of a very blanket statement of, like, you can't do that with, like, racism or any other kind of, like, really horrific shit. And there sort of becomes this fine line of what's acceptable per se and what's not. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it's so fucking outrageous, like, how people, like I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people that it's like, I know I've made mistakes. I know from some mistakes, I've definitely learned how to be a better person. And, you know, something, you know, that I've always taken away, and, like, I have friends who, you know, they would go through a couple of different relationships and so forth, like, dating-wise. And throughout the years of me dating, you know, a lot of times I would have to kind of step back and be like, okay, like, this person did this, this person did this. These are some of the things that led to us not being together anymore. But then I also had to eventually, just as a fucking person who can realize this, you kind of have to learn to take ownership of things and be like, okay,
Right.
well, maybe I did something to cause the things too. It's not just the other person. And something that, like I remember telling some of my friends that it doesn't go over very well, but I'd be like, it's kind of crazy. Like the last 7 people you dated, the only constant, they're all crazy, quote unquote. And I go, but the only other constant in those relationships is you. So did you ever think
Right.
that maybe there's something about what you do that could be part of the problem too? And it's like no one ever wants to take that. No one ever. Another cliche saying: for every finger you point, technically there's 3, but the old saying, there's 4 pointing back at you. Thus saying that
Right.
there's more things kind of damning yourself than there are for the one you're trying to throw at somebody else. And I just don't think that we stop to think about shit like that. It's like, the band Braid. Oh my god, the pussy melter pedal. I can't handle this. Let's start a petition and get it taken away. You know what? Are there any of those motherfuckers that have probably said or done something that maybe I don't like, and be like, I don't like your music. Can I start a petition that I don't like it? Or,
Right.
I don't know, like whatever someone stupid can deem offensive. Like, oh, I don't like Braids, so I don't like your band. Can we get a petition to make your band stop making music because I don't like the name of your band? Like,
Right. Yeah. It's a double standard because everybody is the protagonist of their own movie.
yeah,
It's the way they look at it. That's why everybody's the good guy all the time. And not to bring religion into it, but I remember hearing actually my pastor at my church even said one time, he goes, it's kind of funny whenever somebody else makes a mistake or does something that they shouldn't have done, that's who they are. I figured them out.
right.
But whenever I make a mistake, it is a one-time exception to my otherwise flawless character.
Yeah.
And that rings true. That's how most people are, myself included. Like you said, John, sometimes you have to step back and be like, if I'm looking at this from the outside in, not like Stained, but if you're looking from the outside,
Feeling those lighters.
right, you start seeing things for what they are versus what you want them to be. And I think that's the problem, is that people are not accepting the real world for what it is. They're just trying to change it into what they want it to be, which is fine. If you want the world to be a world where there's a cure for cancer, then for sure, knock yourself out, But, for things that people said in the past and then they admitted that there's a mistake and then they moved on from it. And again, this is a subject that we bring up all the time that we're going to try not to as much anymore, but again, it's not okay for this dude to make tweets 10 years ago, okay, that he apologized for. But Tim Lambesis is allowed to hire a hitman to have his wife killed, and then he goes, "Well, I'm sorry," and then he's allowed to keep his job, but Gunn can't keep his job.
Yeah.
And he didn't try to kill anybody, nor did he serve any jail time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one of those, like, I get where people are saying with Tim, like, oh, he apologized, da 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 da. That's fine, but James Gunn apologized too.
And preemptively. It's not like Tim Lambesis went out and was like, hey, I'm going to hire a hitman, so I'm sorry ahead of time if this bothers anybody.
Right. He didn't. Right. There wasn't a big public out there demanding a public apology.
No.
But they got one anyway. I think, if the studio wanted to sit him down and have a big talking to with him, it's like, look, man, we can't have this stuff. You apologized before, maybe apologize again. I don't know. Whatever you've got to do to clear your name of this. But I think now, though, this is a decision that, to take it in a slightly different direction, this is also a money decision. Where the studio's not willing to take a financial risk of putting another movie out with this guy's name on it because of the controversy, whether it's justified or not.
Right.
Because I think it was the same thing with the Roseanne stuff too, where it was like, they were like, you know what? Whether she apologizes or not, it's one of those, I think Lucius Fox said it in,
Batman.
in Batman, yeah, the Dark Knight, when he's like, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to waste your time, but we can't be seen to be doing business with whatever it is you're accused of being."
Right. Yeah.
And so I think in this particular case, it may have just been a money decision, but it is still unfortunate that when you post stuff online, unfortunately, it's there forever. And that's a generic thing people say, but it's very much the truth.
Yeah.
It's there forever. This podcast, it's going to exist in some form forever, and we have to live up to that, We have to just, roll with it. And, in 10 years, we might be like, oh, my God, I can't believe I said that. But, that's just something that we're going to deal with. And hopefully in 10 years, we don't live in a world where we can lose our job over it.
Well, speaking of apologizing and preemptively apologizing for things being bad, this conversation was done at the intersection while 3 different venues within the venue itself were all sound checking for different shows. So the background noise is going to be pretty omnipresent the whole chat between Gwar sound checking, the band in the front room where we were at, kind of loading in, sound checking, and so forth. I listened to it today. You still can pretty much hear both Blothar and I throughout the whole thing. I think Dan would agree with that.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you're one of those people who gets easily distracted by background noise, maybe this episode sadly isn't for you. But I'm just going to preemptively say it is a good chat. It just might require a little more focus and attention on your end as the listener. And without further ado, this is my chat with Blothar the Berserker of Gwar. We'll talk to you in the outro. So I had the pleasure of talking to Blothar the Berserker here at their stop on the Blood of the Gods tour here in the intersection of Grand Rapids, Michigan. How are you doing this afternoon?
Pretty good. Pretty good so far. I had some coffee. I had a terrible vegetarian sandwich.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not. That's why it was terrible.
That sounds about the same response I would have if I was eating one.
No, I mean, yeah, it was gross. It was like eating just, I don't know, dirt between 2 pieces of fucking bread. But anyway, then I went upstairs, played some chess, masturbated languidly. Now I'm down here talking to you.
Well, I'm glad you got the seat out of you first before talking to me. I know that usually takes the edge off a little bit.
It does.
I kind of wanted to kind of go a more serious approach with this interview, just because there's not really that many of those kinds
I
with
understand.
you.
You're very serious. I'll
And
be serious.
we're still gonna have fun.
Okay.
You had done the Lead Singer Syndrome with a podcast with Shane Toll from Silverstein.
That's right.
And you had mentioned in the interview that you had done a bunch of, and correct me if my pronunciation is wrong, ethnographies. Ethnographies, okay,
Yes.
thank you. About the band, when you were working for Virginia College?
University of Virginia.
Okay.
I was a music professor. I don't teach anymore, but yes, I was. And I ethnomusicology is sort of at the intersection of anthropology and musicology. Mm-hmm. What I do is something called ethnography, which is just a writing practice about and research practice, I suppose, and mostly just writing and that's what I taught was writing ethnographies and writing about music and stuff like that.
So in kind of doing my research on what the word meant,
Right.
not necessarily how to say it, obviously.
It's all right.
But I kind of wondered, in doing the research like that about the band, did it reveal a level of the band that you maybe didn't know about previously, or what did you unearth when you kind of wrote about the band from that perspective?
When I wrote about the band from that perspective, I wasn't in it anymore. I was at. We could move over there if you want. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the things I learned, when I wrote an ethnography about Gwar, or really what I wrote, it was in the process of writing a performance ethnography that was about, it was an experimental sort of first-person performance ethnography, and there were a lot of experimental elements in it, but one of them was sort of writing about my experiences with music. I was not in the band at the time, so I just sort of looked at my journals from when I was in the band and thinking about, and definitely, just looking at the appearance of Gwar in the literature of academic writing is interesting, right? So, because it exists. Like, right. People have written about it. They've written about it in the context of shock rock. They've written about it in the, and I guess, like, I'm considered kind of a shock rock expert, I suppose. Then they've written about it from a musicological standpoint, which was interesting. Like somebody picking apart Gwar's music. So yeah, it's a different way to think about the band. But what was different mainly is that you're not answering questions about what the band does or what the band's mythos is. It's more like how the people in the band work together and what just the sort of culture that you build around being in the band, just among the people that are doing it, right? And also somewhat about reception, right? Like how people receive or understand what we're doing. So yeah, it was interesting.
It was, as I heard that, I was like, man, it'd be really fun and interesting to kind of read that, where you take literally everything that you visually see out of the equation and just kind of focus on what it is as the actual entity, which I don't know that a lot of people are able to do. So I always kind of thought, like, when you approach it from such a very visceral level like that, if it kind of becomes something that you don't realize that it really is.
I think that I realize what it is. It didn't really change for me, because what changes for me is realizing what other people think it is. That's sort of more interesting. My work didn't really lead me down a road where I kind of had a sudden realization about Gwar, other than like really realizing its value in my life, how important it was and how central it was in forming my ideas about life, and I guess that was a surprise, but definitely interested in what people take away from it, and hesitant. I was hesitant. I don't like interpreting things because I really think, but sometimes Gwar does things that are so sort of over the top that when you talk about them, you have to interpret them, because otherwise people are going to take them on face value, especially academics. And what surprised me was that, I fully expected to. I took classes with women and men who were radical feminists, who were, really accomplished scholars in queer studies and cultural studies, and all of the people that folks would point to as being sensitive about these kinds of issues. And Gwar was never viewed in a negative light, and I thought that was interesting. That I did learn. So in other words, there's a kind of there's something about Gwar that allows it to occupy this space that. And I think really what it is that Gwar is marginalized. It's a marginalized metal band. So we can kind of occupy that space a little bit, even though it's a bunch of white dudes out there, and there. But there's always been women that were part of Gwar. And, and now, especially as far as making stuff and the image goes, like always women were part of it. But you know, like certainly like Gwar is not the same as being in, I don't know, fucking Halloween, or you know, it's like we're not cool, you know. And I think that our music really speaks to people who are disaffected, and maybe a lot of academics kind of meet that bill, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I didn't catch any heat for it. I was glad.
Kind of speaking of a band that has kind of caught some shit, I kind of feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up with you guys, or at least with you. Steel Panther with this Pussy Melter pedal fiasco that's going on right now. Have you heard about this?
No, what is this? I
So,
love Steel Panther, though.
Satchel had a pedal that was being made, like a custom pedal being made for him, a guitar pedal, and he called it the Pussy Melter.
Right.
Very much on brand for that band. And this band, Braid, I believe is their name, or Braids, caught wind of it and started a petition to get the company to remove that pedal and the name and all this kind of shit. And the company obviously did decide to work with Satchel to change the name, and they apologized and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of wondered, in the world where, you know, a band that's on a Steel Panther level, where obviously seemingly everyone's in on the joke of it, like that there's the brand of what they do, and you know, the song titles and album titles and so forth, and just everything about it is being a performance. Is it? You know, I was hoping you had heard of this at least, but I was going to say, is it interesting, or are you surprised that there's such outrage about this? And then I was even going to ask, you know, is there such thing where do you think maybe Gwar is grandfathered in from kind of being exempt from such scrutinies as like a Steel Panther?
I don't think that the way that people are approaching this in this country, some people, that anything is grandfathered in, and that's kind of part of the problem. Is that, you know, or a problem that I have with it is this idea that you know, you can apply current standards, and especially, and not even standards, like some people's standards, to things that are that exist out of that context, right? You know, like, and then get all pissed off about it.
Right.
I mean, you know, Steel Panther. So the answer is, I don't think we're grandfathered in. I think that the world is changing to the point that I don't think that Gwar will. We're going to keep pushing, right? But I expect at some point to have some pushback. And
yeah, I was wondering that myself, if you see that coming on the horizon eventually.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, I think that sort of the band has traditionally occupied a space which is more on the sort of, you know, left-leaning, liberal kind of. I mean, it's really more chaotic than anything else.
Right.
Like, you know, but it's definitely anti-authoritarian, and it's definitely. You know, which I guess these days could be, you know, conservatism's anti-authoritarian too. But it's, you know, I mean, so these have traditionally been our allies, but people who have no sense of humor, they're not our allies, and they're not our friends. I don't think they're anybody's fucking friend. Like, I can't really. I've spent a lot of time talking to people who believe these things, and I really don't. I really don't understand what. I don't understand why they come down where they do. Like, I don't understand why. Why does a Pussy Melter pedal make anybody do anything except for laugh? And if you don't like it, then well, don't buy it, or don't. You know, the idea that you can force, and that's really what it is. Like, and Braid, there was no nobility in that. You know, they weren't doing that because dumb.
Because what happens when you get double bookings.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that Braid was doing that because
Nobility.
it's something that they believed in. I think they were trying to get publicity, and
It worked.
And you know, I mean, those guys should, Steel Panther should just keep doing what they're doing. I mean, because at least some of it is drawing attention to the fact of how fucking stupid it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And if people can't see that. Okay.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, though. With the fact that you guys wear the outfits that you do, there's a bit of anonymity in who you actually are. So something in kind of prepping for this interview that I was wondering is, have you ever stumbled across people maybe who find out that there's a show happening, whatever, and they start kind of talking shit about the band or their perception of what the band is and how the people are?
That happens all the time. I mean, I've had people. One time in Vancouver, I was standing outside, and this young punk rock girl, I started talking to her, and she said, she was like, "Yeah, I've seen this band a lot. Tonight they were playing with the music was pre-recorded."
Oh.
And I was like, "Really? Like, what makes you think that?" And she said, "Well, it's because the singer, it all sounded like the other singer, but he's dead, so it couldn't be, it had to be pre-recorded." And I was like, I don't know why sound men always choose really fucking stupid music to EQ a room with, but they all do.
What's been one of the weirdest things you've heard a room get EQ'd to?
I mean, well, they always do something fucking fruity like that, or Sting, or something like something terrible.
And now we're getting Butthole Surfers?
Yeah, but not even good Butthole Surfers. Yeah, I mean, so to answer that question though, oh shit, what was I saying?
You were saying that basically you heard someone saying that you were
playing
the pre-recorded tracks of the old vocals.
Yeah, and I told her, that's not true. I'm glad you thought that. The other person that were people that were talking about. I'm gonna have to wait for this, dude. I can't. Yeah, I mean, what I was gonna say is another time that this happened. Many times. It happens a lot. Like just recently, I was in a comic book shop, and the guy who worked there, like, he saw me. My girlfriend found the Gwar comic, and she's like, "Look, they have it." So I was looking at it, and he's like, "Yeah, you like that?" And he's like, "What do you think of the new singer?" And I was like, "I think he's doing all right. He's trying." And but I have conversations like that fairly regularly. A lot of times outside of a show, fans they don't know who we are. So
the thing I think is really interesting too, and especially in listening to like that Lead Singer Syndrome podcast with you, is I assume that the general consensus is that you guys are all relatively stupid.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and from having friends who have toured with you guys collectively over the handful of years, is like how smart. Like I've hung out with Brad and a few other people, and how just knowledgeable they are on everything. And I don't think you can travel the world and be stupid. I think it'd be kind of fucking hard to be really stupid and have traveled the world.
I'm going to disagree with you there.
You think
there's a lot of metal guys, a lot of people, musicians, period, that I've met that I have no real understanding of how the fuck they manage to put gas in the band and keep going. Seriously, and usually they're not actually stupid, they're just fucked up on drugs or something. But definitely, there's been some people that I have had questions about, and I think that, there's certainly, music's like anything else. I think you do have people that aren't that bright that do it. But they obviously have some kind of intellectual capacity because they're musicians, which is an intellectual activity, really. And, Gwar has always been surprising to people. And the much more interesting story about Gwar has always been the one that's out of character, that is like just all the stuff that is real, and the relationships in the band and all that stuff, to us anyway, that's always been more entertaining to me to know about and understand than what we put on stage even. But like the people in this band it's a band full of people that are smart, and it always has been. It's not a band that started by, I think I would compare it to Devo, because more than Kiss, right? Where Kiss is like, they're a band that's up there trying to, there's definitely a sort of really stupid masculinity about Kiss. Yeah, Peter.
I don't
Criss.
know. I was gonna say, I don't know if that applies to Chris.
Yeah, maybe not Peter Criss. Peter Criss, he's, I don't know. They're good guys. They were I think they were a great band, Kiss. But definitely the sort of image that they put out has a kind of hyper masculinity that is, and it's even toxic at times, like a weird, Christine 16, but at the same time, a band like Devo, who had an elaborate stage performance, is much more of a direct influence on Gwar. And it's a band with an idea, a band with a concept, and also a band that had a level, I think, that Gwar mounts on stage, a pretty serious critique of modernity, and it always has. Yes, people are frequently surprised that the people in the band are articulate, but what I was going to say about Devo is that another comparison is that Devo's a band that came out of an art school, right? And that's what Gwar came out of. So this is a group that has been driven by visual art and an engagement with popular culture and the valorization of the low. That's what Gwar is about, and there's nothing stupid about that.
No. Kind of shifting again, the last cross-country Warped Tour, which I think is part of the sentence people aren't latching onto, speaking of people not paying attention. That's happening right now, and you guys were a part of that, the full run last year. Are you surprised to see it wrapping up being a full cross-country tour?
No, the attendance was down, and it had been down. It was still good in major markets, but there were definitely some places where, it was pretty clear to me that, because you got to figure how much that production costs. Ultimately, Kevin's paying for, what is there, like 40 coaches on the road, 40 tour buses, a bunch of, the bands really aren't allowed to drive themselves, so you've got, they can, but it's just torture, it's just hell. Yeah. So, you got the band wagons and, and then the hotels and, and all of the production, it's expensive as shit, and, the fact that he kept it going as long as he did is much more surprising to me than the fact that it's ending. And I also think maybe its cultural moment passed a little bit, right? Like it was about sort of 90s, or not 90s, but just that 2000s, young bands, Blink-182, right? That type thing. It was weird because there were some older, when we played with the Alarm, nobody knew who the fucking Alarm were. Nobody. Right. Nobody. So there was 8 people watching them every night, and they were super great guys, But to me, when I was a kid, they're a big deal,
Right.
So that was interesting.
It was weird for me because my wife and I made a trip to go see a friend's band in Rhode Island play their last show, and then found out that the next day Hartford was the Warped Tour date, so we went to the Hartford date, and It was very weird for me because with having a friend on the tour who allowed us to kind of get all access to everything. You know, for me having book shows in this very room that we're in right now and seeing how setups go and stuff like that, to see just the scale of what that looked like, the crews working together to get the show going and just stay on time and so forth, was just really interesting to me as someone who puts on shows sporadically now. But what was really weird is like seeing, some of the older bands that played those first couple of Warped Tours, and then you'd have a band like Attila, and you'd literally see thousands of kids shift over to watch them and get ready for them, endure whatever band was on, and then it almost was like as soon as Attila was done and like another legacy act was playing, gone. And then it was also interesting to see some other bands like yourself or whatever, where I saw a lot of kids coming to see you guys play, and it was a thing of like, are you here because you enjoy the music, or is it because of the word of mouth of like, oh, Gwar is really cool, they put on a stage show, so on and so forth. And it was really weird to be almost in my mid-30s watching this thing where I'm like, well, how does this kid know these songs from an album that was out before they were even born? And so it was kind of interesting to me to see and hear like, yeah, this date was really awesome, but the next three were shit. And to kind of see just the weird cultural shifts of what's going on in the Warped Tour. And, even Keith Buckley from Eats It just wrote a thing about how really Warped Tour was never for the bands or about the bands. It was about the fans having something to look forward to, this community of people, this cross-culture, I guess. And so it's kind of interesting to look at it more from that and kind of see that maybe that's gone from the tour.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean... But there's a lot of things that are fucking gone. I mean, it's true. Like, and it depends on how old you are as to what you remember. I mean, I do think that, like, when I hang out with people who are in their 80s, I'm like, it must be a challenge just to look at the world and see how much it fucking sucks, and how much it's gone downhill, and how better things used to be. And I don't think it's your imagination either. I really do think that things just start to fucking suck. And, one of the things is that we mentioned the Butthole Surfers early on, and you mentioned like this kind of like maybe a segmentation of markets or people's awareness of like what bands are. They're not interested in the legacy acts. Although, I mean, I'll be honest with you, like they love, like Gwar did really well on that tour, and Gwar continues to be popular with young people, and we're fortunate in that. We don't take it for granted. I mean, but Gwar is a band that never fit into any notches, any place. There's really nothing else that's like it, and certainly for but it used to be like I mentioned the Butthole Surfers. You would go to a show in a town, and there was a lot of practices that are gone that were kind of cool. One was they used to have matinee shows for kids, and then the same show at night for people who could drink. That happened with some regularity.
We used to do that when I used to come to this town, actually. In that main room, we would have bands, local bands.
Yeah, and so, you'd play once, and then you'd play again. And then, of course, they developed the wristbanding system, and that kind of went away. But the other thing is that the audiences tended not to be segmented. Like, and really, even by the early 90s, I could see that happening. That, like, it had been that you would go to a show, and the same people who went to the Circle Jerks or a Cro-Mags show, although Cro-Mags, that's the beginning of where it starts fucking segmenting, right?
Right.
But like, and that's the beginning too of emo and all that shit. Where Ian's looking at what's going on at these shows, and there again, it was this problematic masculinity that those bands promoted. That resulted in violence and a bunch of weird shit going on at shows. But like, the thing is that at these shows, it was always like everything mixed up. Like you could go see the Butthole Surfers and go see the Cro-Mags and go see Circle Jerks, and it was all punk. Even stuff that was really not punk, right? Like, like some weird rockabilly stuff. Anything that was on that circuit, people were going to see, and it really started to segment, and you had like what Biafra calls it an orthodoxy that sprang up in hardcore, where it started to be following a kind of a set of rules, both like sartorical rules and like less musical rules and all kinds of things, behavioral rules. And he viewed that as kind of the beginning of the end for punk in America. I don't know about that, but...
So I'm going to kind of wrap this up so that we can get on with your day and maybe eat some more disgusting vegetarian sandwiches.
Yeah.
Going to kind of ask you a traditional Gwar question because I was thinking about this in preparation for last night. Your new album's called Blood of the Gods. This is the Blood of the Gods tour.
Yeah.
In Blothar, since I'm talking to you, were you able to secure any blood of any gods? And if you didn't, what god would you like to have secured some blood for this tour?
Well, I mean, it's the blood of gods is really what it's called, and it's Blothar and all of Gwar. I mean, we're built out of the blood of gods, and at least some of the title for that record was, this idea that, what happens when people just start ignoring gods, right? Like, then they go away, right? Like, and so I had this image in my head of a starving god because, they get. I mean, in a lot of religions, they're fed for sacrifice and whatever, and if you leave them alone, then and there are people who believe that they just continue to exist because they can't die; they're just starving and miserable,
Right.
So I kind of thought of Gwar as like being in that position, right? Like, but I mean, really, what that album title is it's a lot about the loss of Odorous, So,
right.
And that's, so I haven't, we've definitely killed some gods on the stage, but so we have that blood on our hands. But really, it's more our blood that we're talking about, And there is some attrition being in Gwar. There's a lot of loss in this band, and it keeps moving.
And then last question, I always like to end these episodes out to a song. What would you like me to play it out to? And maybe a quick story as to why.
I would play it out with shit. I don't know, off of the album. I'd play it out with I'll Be Your Monster. It's a new Gwar song, got a video for it. It's rocking. It's not as metal as some of the stuff we have done, but it's a fun tune. And it's, I think it's a good one.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time.
So that was my chat with Michael Bishop, a.k.a. Blothar the Berserker of Gwar. Dan, what did you think of that?
Check drums, please. Okay, bang, bang, bang. No, I'm kidding. No, man, that was awesome because I really wasn't sure how it was going to go. If you were going to do because we had talked prior to the episode whether this was going to be like a played, in character, played straight kind of interview, or if we were going to try to talk to the man behind the costume, And I'm glad we got the guy behind the costume because he had a lot of really cool things to say about a lot of stuff. I mean, for a 30-minute interview, you guys covered miles.
Well, it was kind of funny, too, because, and I already sent an email out to this person, but I'm going to give a shout-out to Shane Told over at the Lead Singer Syndrome podcast. Last year on the Warped Tour, he got to talk with Blothar, and as far as I know, is the only other serious interview that I've ever heard with anyone from Gwar. And as a result, when I heard that podcast a year ago, that's really where I was like, wow, I think there would be so much more to learn and to gain knowledge of, because something I've said, and if you go back to the Skylar from He Is Legend episode, and I even think the episode I did with Chad Nicefield from Wilson, the first episode I did with him, I've talked to a handful of people that have toured with Gwar, and, everyone always has the same sentiment echoed, which is, those guys have been doing it for so long, they're so professional, they're so knowledgeable on so many things that, you can't help but learn from them, and the almost probably 30 years of touring and just everything that they've learned about the industry and so forth. And, so it was one of those things where when on the Lead Singer Syndrome podcast, hearing Michael talk with Shane and just be him, not a character, that really opened me up to wanting to hear more interviews with those guys in that same kind of format, because that's what's great about a podcast, is learning something about someone that you don't typically get to hear. And typically you do not get to hear Gwar interviews in a serious tone. They're always kind of satirical in nature. And, I gotta say, it was really hard when I was writing questions to ask a character. And you may think that it wouldn't be that hard, but it's like when you realize that almost anything you ask is going to kind of have a throwaway answer because of the nature of talking to a character.
Right. There's a handbook. There's a handbook of responses.
Right.
For every question when you're talking about the Gwar mythology.
Yes.
And that, and I really honestly wasn't really that interested to hear that, because if you're a fan of Gwar, you kind of already know.
Yeah.
And again, these are the kind of questions that they're going to get asked all the time. It's like for Gwar, of course, everything has to be weird and different, right?
Right.
So, asking them a question about their mythology is on par with, when did you first start singing?
Yeah.
When did you first get your first guitar? Just stuff like that. It just is trite. So of course with Gwar, you turn it upside down when you start asking him, personal questions about things. That's the weird, different thing,
Well, I thought to me, like one of the interesting ones, and I'm glad he actually took the time to answer it and gave us examples, was, the anonymity. Like, I also was really glad because I actually obviously got to talk to him in person, and he was not in costume, so that made it a lot easier, because I don't think I could have handled talking to a guy who looks like you or I, pretending to be a character that he's not dressed up as. Would have been very hard. And it was really interesting to kind of take that dive into, you are in this weird position where no one really knows what any of you guys look like. It's almost like Kiss, when before Kiss took off the makeup, like no one knew what they look like. And so it's like they have this weird anonymity factor about them where they can literally go out after a show, after they like get all their gear off, and go hang out with their fans and really get a true glimpse of what their fans think of them and their music. And to me, that's just so interesting to kind of pick at and kind of, be like, yo, like what is the craziest thing you've ever heard said about you to you?
Yeah, that was great. The story he told about the girl in the comic shop.
Yeah.
There was like, what do you think of the new singer? And he just responded like, well, I think he's all right. I think he's trying really hard.
Yeah.
I was like, because what else can you say in that situation?
Right.
And that I got a pretty big chuckle out of that. No, I definitely enjoyed like just how deep of a dude we have here. Like he really went into a lot of like the social like constructs that are behind Gwar, and like how people are going, like he's done the research on how people perceive things. And then that's what ended up eventually leading to if things keep going the way they're going, we're probably going to have to call it a day.
That's really interesting, though, to kind of even pick apart on that, because, it's like, I was going to ask him that anyway, but it's really weird that we got to that part of the conversation because of the pussy melter pedal.
Right.
Let that sink in for just a split second. Because of the politically correct world we live in now, and someone not being able to put out a pussy melter pedal from a 80s hair metal band in 2018 that have songs about fucking fat chicks and blue balls and all this kind of stuff and playing characters, and we're upset about a guitar pedal that serves a legitimate practical purpose.
Right.
But in this, it was crazy I was going to ask, like, do you see a point where Gwar won't be accepted in this politically correct climate? And it, I don't know when the last time, or if you've even seen Gwar, but it's been kind of crazy. Like, it's a multi-generational type event. Parents bring their kids, and it's, for lack of a better word, it's like, a theatrical experience. There's skits kind of going on. There's a storyline going on between the songs and so forth, and it's it's a show, and
it's a full scale performance. It's not a rock concert.
Yeah,
it's not. It includes. It's a full scale performance that includes a rock concert.
Right.
And
so it's one of those things where thinking about how touchy everybody is nowadays, and maybe that might even piss people off. But
pissing me off, John.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where it was really kind of weird that I was going to ask, like, do you see an end for Gwar? And he's just like, I kind of think maybe that's going to be what causes the band to go away. Not because we're ready to call it a day, but because we're going to be forced out just due to how we are.
Right. It's not a terrible point either. Obviously we don't really want to see that. But one thing that does shine a little light of hope on that, though, and something he said that really rings true, is that for whatever reason, younger people tend to connect with Gwar better than older people. And, like, that's totally true because, like, when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school and I was, like, really, I mean, it was all about metalcore for me at that time. But I remember, all these freshmen would come in with Gwar shirts. There's kind of like a trope of the young metal kid. His favorite bands are Gwar, Motorhead, Metallica, and AC/DC. Because you're just getting started. Yeah, with this kind of music, and I mean it's not a bad place to start, for sure. But it's interesting that Gwar is always in there because of how different they are from the aforementioned bands, and there's just something really bizarre and alien about Gwar that's almost inviting for younger people because it becomes their own personal thing.
Right.
Like for me, that thing was death metal. Like really extreme blast beat music that just makes people be like, what? But Gwar has the same effect on people, just not, just in a different way. They use the visual aspect of it to kind of get, to get those type of responses. So I think that if younger people continue to jump on the Gwar bandwagon, as they seem to always have, within the past 20 years or so, it seems like, they're still getting new fans. I mean, how many bands that are as old as Gwar, no offense to them, get new fans?
Not many.
Like new listeners, and because, I get accused all the time of listening to dad rock or dad metal, and I'm like, well, this, when I went and saw Zao in Nashville recently, and they were like, how many, they were commenting that, there are people here that are younger than the band has been around.
Right.
And they're they may not necessarily be there to see that band, but yeah, to see a band like Gwar, just come out there and they're still catching 15-year-olds, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm at the point with this episode where I'm really excited and nervous to put it out, because I'm excited for Gwar fans to find it, but I'm really nervous that Gwar fans aren't gonna like the serious nature of it.
Right.
Because, they're so loyal and they're so diehard. I mean, it's almost how I felt about the Hopes Fall episode, and that did really, really well. So, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be worried about it, but, and my other big thing is that I'm also, obviously, I listened to this interview today just because I hadn't listened to it since I did it, but I wasn't sure how bad the background noise was going to be, and I was kind of bummed at how loud it was, but like I said, you can hear Mike and I really clearly.
Oh, yeah.
You just kind of have to... I mean, there's not really and I'll paint this picture. So literally, Gwar in a full-on production for that tour, we're sound checking in a main room with the door open into the smaller venue, where a local band was doing their CD release, the Hollowfront guys, and then in the basement, which is where I was standing above, was an EDM show. So at times when you hear that really low-end bass kind of like rattling, that was the EDM show down in the basement. So it's like no matter where I went, I couldn't go anywhere and escape the noise. So we just kind of had to make do with what we were doing. And, you know, I think we did a good job of being able to like I said, you can hear us both pretty well. Even some funny side commentary about sound guys sound checking or EQing the levels to garbage bullshit.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think if you're a Gwar fan, you just need to imagine that, you know, this interview was conducted in an alien spaceport, you know, on the edge of eternity, you know, and you'll be fine.
In Antarctica.
Don't worry about it. Yeah. No, I thought it was a good interview, man. I can't wait to see what people think of it, if it generates some buzz, you know. I always like to hear people's interpretations of what's said, but I liked the straightforwardness of it, and I liked the honesty. So I think it's gonna be good.
Yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. So if you would like to follow our show sponsor, The Bean Bastard, you can find them at thebeanbastard.com. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram at The Bean Bastard. And if you would like to keep up with our partners over at Moshpit Nation, you can do such over at moshpitnation.com. You can find them on Facebook at facebook.com/moshpitnationwest, capital MI. Twitter and Instagram are simply Moshpit Nation. And Dan, where can everyone follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at DiscussMetalDan. You can find my other podcast, Discography Discussion, at discussmetal.com.
Thanks for ruining Iced Earth for me. I didn't like the band anyway, but I definitely don't like them now.
Oh, I'm never listening to Iced Earth again. I don't have to. You can't make me. So.
And if you would like to keep up with everything going on with this podcast, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at John's Entitled Podcast. Tweet at the podcast at John's Entitled Pod, and email me at johnsentitledpod@gmail.com. If you would like to be a show sponsor, we got some really good episodes coming up. Not going to tease them just yet because I don't want to jinx them, but got a couple more in-person interviews coming up and some already in the can. But very much looking forward to getting some of these out. Actually, I'll tease one. The Phineas interview I did a couple of days after this Blothar episode in the exact same venue was really good. I was expecting to talk to Bryce, their bass player, and ended up talking to everyone in the band but Bryce.
Nice.
But we go on a really interesting dive on Warped Tour etiquette, Islander, little tease there. We also get into a bit about religion, being a Christian band in today's world, in a touring band and so forth, and a lot of other fun stuff. So
I'm so bummed out I missed out on that.
Yeah, it was surprisingly really good. And once I got thrown the curveball that I was getting 3/4 of the band, I pretty much just abandoned the questions I wrote and just went straight from the hip. And I think it's typically, it seems like that's the best interviews I've been doing lately. It's just kind of off the cuff. Another great thing that helps this podcast as well, rate, review, subscribe. Dan, do you want to tell the people why we harp so much on this?
The reason we love reviews so much, positive preferred, negative, we like it when people send us negative reviews privately, but if you feel like you have to post it, then don't let us stop you. Reviews are great because everything on the internet these days is run by algorithms and recommendations. Therefore, the more times a product is reviewed by listeners such as yourself, that gives us a bigger opportunity to be recommended by an algorithm on a website to other listeners who might be looking for the same thing that you're enjoying right now. So that's the only reason we ask for reviews. We ask for them just so that we can get a little bit of exposure without having to do dumb things that other people do, like get paid likes and give Facebook and Twitter all their money to run targeted ads that don't work. So we just like to keep it as grassroots as possible. We want to hear from you guys, and your guys' recommendations are what's going to get us exposure, not some mechanical, faceless entity. So we appreciate you guys, anybody that's reviewed the podcast so far, and keep them coming.
And speaking of a grassroots approach, we have 5 days as of when this is going up to tweet at Ice-T. I'm still not giving up hope. Actually, someone reached out to me via Facebook and gave me potentially what they thought the publicist for Ice-T was. I've emailed them, but they are currently at San Diego Comic-Con, so I probably won't hear from them until Monday. But a handful of people have reached out to Ice. Ice has liked a few of those tweets, as well as a few of my tweets, in regards to responding and retweeting those tweets and sharing the comments. So please keep those coming. I really do think that if enough people do this, he's I don't think he's going to be so wow that I have people doing it, because it's very obvious that I'm asking people to do this. But what I do hope is that he just sees the work I'm putting in to try to get him, and he sees the hustle and can kind of respect that, and just, give me a few minutes while he's here in my town, 5 minutes from my house. So please, 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 we have 5 more days. Tweet at Ice-T at Final Level. Tag me in it at John's Untitled Pod. You can include Dan as well at Discuss Metal Dan, and use the hashtag Ice-T on JUP. I have been retweeting, resharing, all that stuff, everything that gets tweeted out in that regard. So please, 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 please help me get Ice-T on this podcast. While it's a very singular thing, if it happens that it'll be me doing it, I think we will all share in the victory of getting this thing to happen.
I will bask in the glory.
I don't even know what I'll do. I'll probably freak out internally.
Don't say anything you're going to get fired for in 10 years.
I'll only say awesome things that'll get more people that want to come on this podcast.
That's perfect, because it's there forever, my friend.
And on that note, we're going to end this episode as we always do, with a song. And as you heard him say, he wanted me to play out to I'll Be Your Monster off Gwar's newest record, Blood of the Gods. So this is going to be a new Gwar tune for you. Go out and check out that record, and we will talk to you next week.